start with some housekeeping. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here with us. Thank you so much, Judy Beil Vaughan. The structure of tonight's event will first be an introduction, then a talk and readings from author Judy Beil Vaughan. And lastly, we'll have some time to answer any questions, take comments. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to use the chat box to type in your concern there, and I will address them and assist you there. And to ask a question or make any comments, you may use the chat box. I'll check there. There's also a Q&A box, so we can line up questions there as we go and address them at the appropriate time. I'm going to do an introduction to your Judy, and then we'll get started. Judy Beil Vaughan grew up in northern New Mexico on the family horse ranch, detailed in her New Mexico memoir, Strawberry Roan, published in 2020. She left the family ranch for boarding school in Colorado and then attended Carleton College and the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. She has composed stories since childhood and began to hone the craft of writing after 40 years practicing medicine. She lives in Elk Grove, California, and writes stories featuring horses and the Southwest. Please welcome Judy Beil Vaughan.
Hello, everybody. So as I talk, you're going to see some pictures going by, and I'm not going to say anything about the pictures. I think as you read, you'll probably figure out the captions, but you'll have a question period at the end to ask questions later. Is this going all right, Jessica? Can everybody hear me? And
You're all good to go, Judy.
okay, good. All right. Well, as you may have noticed, Strawberry Roan is subtitled Growing Up in the Shadow of Hermit's Peak. Lots and lots of my stories are about horses, but in this story tonight, you're going to learn about Hermit's Peak and what it meant. The whole book, my book, covers the time that I lived in Las Vegas, New Mexico, which was over 30 years. The family horse ranch, the Lazy Bee, was 12 miles outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico in the Guyanas Canyon. Hermit's Peak was this peak, and it was right at the head of this beautiful mountain valley where we lived. The trailhead, Las Vegas was about 12 miles away. The trailhead to Hermit's Peak was about 5 miles from my house. So these pictures are significant to the story because it shows how much of a view of Hermit's Peak we had all the time, every day from the house. During this story, in which 5 teenagers climb Hermit's Peak in a rainstorm, you can see that my parents would have had a full view of the bad weather the whole time. I'd like to just introduce who the people in the story are so that you'll be able to follow it a little better. So the cast of characters includes my cousin Tom, who was 16 and working as a helper to the ranch hand that summer. The other teens were from a Chicago family that had a summer cabin almost across from our barn in the Guyanas Canyon. There was Kathy, or Kathy, as her mother called her brother Chris, and their friend Mike. When Kathy was a daily riding companion to me while her family was in the canyon. So now I'm going to start reading Up Hermit's Peak. The action took place in August of 1958. By age 14, I was the leader of just about any excursion on horseback in the Guyanas Canyon. I rode the trails daily, piloting friends, relatives, or potential horse buyers outward from the lazy bee. The most dramatic and popular ride was the switchback trail up Hermit's Peak. On a clear, dry day from the top of Hermit's Peak, the view stretched for miles. "Let's climb the old peak," my friend Kathy said one August morning as we were saddling the horses for our usual morning ride. "Mike and Chris want to come, and Tom should come too." I nodded. I was already choosing which horse to use for each of the 5 riders. "Then," Kathy said, "we'll hike, all of us." "Wait, you want us to walk?" "Yes," she answered. I shook my head. Truthfully, I pitied hikers, especially those who crossed streams and got their feet wet. Besides, from the elevated vantage point of a horse, you could see far and wide. On horseback, you could hear the creak of the saddle and smell the sweet scent of your mount as their twitching ears told the tale of the trail. "Sad to say," Kathy said, "my brother won't get back on a horse. He could hardly walk after the ride we took last week." I smiled. 20 miles over El Cielo Mountain. True, Kathy and I punished her brother and Mike when we rode the rough trail to see the beautiful, ghostly sight of Harvey Ranch. "We're going home to Chicago soon," Kathy lamented. She grinned but held her ground. "Can you take us tomorrow?" Was she trying for sympathy or persuasion or both? My smile faded. This was my last chance for the companionship I craved. Kathy continued, "We've never seen the view all the way to Texas. Besides, we want to see the Hermit." I leaned against my saddle and took a deep breath. "The Hermit's dead," I told her. She gave me a long, sad look. "Well," I said, thinking about the effort of walking, "there's a way to bypass the tedious part of the trail with a shortcut. Tom could drive the Jeep a ways from El Porvenir Lodge, and then we could pick up the trail at the start of the ascent." My 16-year-old cousin Tom slept in my father's woodshop downstairs and served as general assistant to the ranch hand that summer. I'd often sit on his couch bed and listen to his tales of mischief at his Kansas high school. Tom was really my first love. He was really my first love, and I knew he'd enjoy the outing and take some of the burden of the older boys off my shoulders. The following day, we fixed sandwiches for the hike, and Tom and I put on our battered straw cowboy hats. Good thing we had them. They'd protect us from sun or rain. I looked up. Would we need them? The sky was uncharacteristically overcast. Tom started the red cab-forward Jeep with its snub-nosed front. We crossed the Guyanas, drove out the ranch gate. About a mile down the road, a steep drive led to the cabin where Kathy, Chris, and Mike were staying. They ran out and hopped into the bed of the little truck. I wrapped a sandwich in my poncho. Neither I nor anyone I knew owned a backpack. I thought about how it would be if we were riding instead of hiking. So if I had a horse for this excursion, I'd have been prepared. Tanned leather saddlebags would ride snugly behind the cantle, filled with my lunch and an Army surplus canteen. I'd tie a yellow oilcloth rain slicker across the pommel of my Western saddle. For an overnight pack trip, I would lead another horse carrying a pack saddle. Spacious panniers would hang from it, filled with our stuff, the bedroll and coffee pot, canned goods and tortillas. All this covered with a tarp, the load tied down with a perfect double diamond hitch. I sighed. For today's climb, we'd be afoot. But for my friend Kathy, I'd do most anything. How bad could it be? Tom drove to the trailhead at El Porvenir Lodge, a pale green stucco inn in Pueblo style, flanked by motel units open only for the short summer season. In the dim shadow of the mountain, he drove a bit further along an old wagon road that paralleled the official trail and saved us the first mile's walk along the base of the peak, through scenically boring scrub oak and large round rocks. The Chicago teens clung to the sides of the pickup bed as we bounced along. Tom straddled the original ruts to avoid high centering the truck between the eroded tracks. The mountain had shed flaky granite boulders around its base, like a giant with dandruff. The rocks eroded further into the sandy soil that covered the underlying brick red clay exposed in the depth of the ruts. We parked the Jeep among the scrub oak and began to climb. We congratulated ourselves, not just for the shortcut, but for the cool weather, as if we had selected it from a catalog. The trail ascended over switchbacks along a groove between the two larger cliff faces of the peak. Near the base, we padded through the needle-covered ponderosa forest. As it thinned, the trail abruptly and steeply narrowed into a rock cleft in which a dwarf aspen quaked in the faint breeze, its roots clawing a rocky perch. I remembered that cleft, so familiar it had appeared in my dreams. Back and forth we hiked the switchbacks, our chatter fading with the respiratory effort of rising altitude and thinning oxygen. Near the top, we turned onto a side trail marked by a faded board on a pine stake painted with the hermit's name, Giovanni Maria D'Agostini. The trail to the hermit's cave coursed sideways across the steepest of the three faces of the peak. A few yards behind, we peered into the cave, which was really just an overhang on the southeast side, 100 feet below the summit. Kathy and Chris knelt and bowed their heads by the rudimentary shrine on the small wooden table, painted a once vibrant blue. The unique shade, Virgin of Guadalupe blue, coated countless churches and homes throughout New Mexico. A green patch marked the tiny spring that had sustained the hermit. Tom and I hung back and studied the racing clouds. We crouched and sucked a drink from the spring, careful not to get more gravel than water. The day had acquired an eerie light, and the wind picked up. We looked out over the steep decline. We were above the cloud line at 10,000 feet. The gray void rippled. I knew the clouds hit a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. Let's go on to the top. Maybe the weather will clear and we can see the view, I said. Fat chance. It was already raining. We unfurled our rain gear. I had an Army surplus poncho, which could be used as a raincoat or reconfigured into a lean-to or one-man tent. The others had some sort of jacket, except Mike, the unofficial juvenile delinquent. He had nothing except the t-shirt that clung to his deltoids and held his pack of Chesterfields. He reminded me of James Dean. Our bag lunches had been enclosed in our wraps, which were tied around our waists. Now we carried the paper bags, sheltering them as best we could. These sandwiches are going to be mush. I'm eating mine, I said. We didn't carry water. There was the spring at the cave and another on top of the peak. We were not soft on water, like people who had to take a swig every hour or so. The rain indeed lightened. We won't stay long on top. I heard rumble through the thick, moist air. Uh-oh. I knew I should avoid the peak and the thunderstorms that marked the afternoon showers, but I hadn't expected a thunderstorm from the overcast I had ignored this morning. I thought those flat clouds heralded a quiet front that would bring 2 or 3 days of light rain. My companion's faces blurred in the floating mist. We were well inside the cloud. We trudged through the last corridor of rocks onto the shallow dome that led to the summit of stunted evergreens. Crack! My ears whined after the loudest thunderclap I'd ever heard. Crack! Crack! We stopped and gathered close enough to reassure each other that we were all present and accounted for. Hailstones pelted us, the straw hats rattling in their scant protection. Thunder meant lightning. I knew lightning. It had killed one of my Las Vegas classmates, another ranch kid struck while gathering his family's cattle. I'd seen it strike the stairwell as I walked to my room at home. Now my friends and I stood on the highest point for miles around in the midst of a storm where, minus the cloud cover, we could have seen 3 states. And I was responsible. It gave me an eerie feeling. The sky was growing blacker by the minute. Crack! A bolt struck a pine tree just yards away. Another thunderclap assaulted our ears, and then explosions surrounded us. Boom, boom, crack. The forest was instantly alive with spears of white light standing jagged and immeasurably bright in the rain-moistened air. Get off the summit, I yelled over the din. Go back down the trail, said Tom. Stung by hail, soaked in rain and sweat, we ran down the disintegrating trail. Led by Tom, we ducked into an overhang cave similar to the Hermit's, but lofty and open. After the last of us arrived, now wet to the bone, breathless and open-mouthed, we huddled together for a few moments. Shivering, we looked into each other's eyes. The hail bulleted down, thunder crashed, but at least we were safe from lightning. Tom gathered some juniper branches, pine cones, and dry leaves, which were just miraculously there in a corner of the cave. He laid the wood over the detritus that served as kindling. I looked up at the soot-blackened roof. We weren't the first to make a fire here. Mike used his Zippo to light a damp cigarette and to ignite Tom's firewood. I watched the others eat their soggy sandwiches. My stomach growled, but I wasn't as nervous as I'd been on the summit. One by one, our voices returned as the drum of the hail subsided. A laugh here, an Elvis verse from Kathy. I put my arm around Tom. It was pretty fun to be in a mountain cave with your friends and feel safe around a campfire. Then the rain and hail got worse. Within minutes, the trail just over the threshold of our shelter was a waterfall. The switchbacks were running into mudslides. Boom, crunch, rumble. Reports that might have been from cannon fire bombarded my ears. Stones the size of footballs began to fall all around us. It's caving in, I hollered. Let's get out of here. Wait, Tom grabbed my arm. Loose rocks are washing off the overhang. You'll be hit if you go out. You're better off here. I leaned against Tom. He was right, of course. The rocks continued to roll off the ledge that roofed the cave. For long minutes, the storm scrubbed the mountain's soft, soaked granite, leaving piles of rocks at the mouth of the cave. We were inside a giant gravel crusher, sheltered like Jonah in the whale. Then, suddenly, it was over. Silence. The roar of the flood slowed within minutes. The Chicago kids stopped crossing themselves. Color returned to their faces. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, cried Mike as he crawled out and stumped down the trail. Tom and I put out the fire. I shivered. Tom touched my arm. I'll go ahead and warm the truck, he said. Chris went with him, leaving Kathy and me behind. Watch the trail, the rocks are loose, I told Kathy. We picked our way down the remnants of the path, slippery and smelling of wet pine. The boys were already out of sight or earshot. Kathy's kid soles provided no traction. She fell a number of times. My cowboy boots had smooth leather soles, but the high heels spiked into the gravel and duff and kept me going. Oh, twisted my ankle again, Kathy said. At least it isn't raining. Tiny, hard ice crystals began to pelt us. Kathy rolled her eyes. What now? Tendrils of damp hair were stuck to her face. Get me that stick, she said. I picked up a crooked branch and made it into a walking stick for her, and then we continued slowly down the trail. Are you okay? I asked Kathy as she hobbled along. The image of the Jeep's warm cab beckoned. I'm not okay, but we must be near the truck, she said. I saw a flash of red below us on the trail by a thicket of oak. I see it! The truck! Thank God, said Kathy as we neared the truck. Its cold, silent exterior met us. Water streaked the windshield. No friendly steam rose. Kathy's teeth chattered. I pulled the handle. The truck was locked. Mike! Tom! Kathy yelled and we hooted together. An A-bear squirrel cocked its tassel ears and chittered at the entertainment. The wind hummed in the pines. The sky lightened. There was nowhere dry to sit down, but it didn't seem as cold as before. Ah! I realized where the boys were. They were at El Porvenir Lodge. The main trail began and ended there. After our extended shortcut drive, we had to take a walk cross country to intersect the trail to the peak. During the aftermath of the storm, the boys ran down the trail and failed to remember the shortcut and the Jeep hidden in the brush. Cold, stressed, and in survival mode, we were all outdone by the extreme weather. Tracks from our ascent were washed out. Had they figured out their error? Like where are Judy and Kathy and the truck? What happened? I could hear their thoughts. We have to keep calling. I'll walk up towards the trail. I don't want you to leave, Kathy said, shaking. I just want this to be over. We'll give them a few minutes. You don't want to walk any more than you have to. I steadied my voice and pushed an image of nightfall from my mind and let a sharp-edged laugh escape. Warm the truck up for us, my ass. Judy? Tom's voice came out of the pines. Chris and Mike marched alongside. Mike kicked the gravel. Jesus H. Christ, said Kathy. Tom laughed. No, I don't even wish that. She hobbled over and embraced her brother. You left us. You missed the Jeep. I didn't wait for any excuse. Here, give me the keys, I demanded. A stunning sunset backlit the peak when we tumbled out of the truck and stretched our stiff limbs. We were home and in good spirits. My sister's law student fiance, Jimmy, stood cussing us out on the porch of the ranch house. We knew Jimmy was no paragon of good judgment. Let it go, Tom said to him. My mother wasn't dismissed so easily. We thought you'd be home an hour after you left. We saw that storm when you didn't come back. She teared up. We trusted your good sense, added my dad. You should have turned back. That was the consequence. Daddy didn't punish. He informed and corrected, but mostly he expected, and we hadn't measured up. Thereafter, I knew the spiritual lesson, the truth of the mountain. Hermit's Peak wasn't just the view from the ranch. It was more than the place I could go to see a vista all the way to Texas. I had thought of the mountain as a benign presence. It wasn't. We had seen it turn a summer storm into deadly fire spears. We had seen rocks rain down. We had been frozen by icy summer rain. We had been scared witless. Hermit's Peak knew nothing of 5 foolish teens on a hike into the upper story of hell's attic. The next time I climbed Hermit's Peak, in 1979, my own children, Betsy and Ellen and their cousins were my companions. We had day packs, lunches, canteens, sunscreen, sensible footwear, and rain gear. Clear sky, dry weather. I planned for rain, sleet, snow, hail, and whatever else made the hermit hide under a rock.
That's awesome, Judy. Thank you. I've
very
definitely had unprepared hikes in Colorado.
What?
I've definitely had unprepared hikes in Colorado.
Okay.
My father-in-law is, he does Southwest studies and adventure studies in Colorado. His name is Andrew
Oh, yeah?
Goldberg. And
Oh,
he always tells us if we're going on a hike, make sure to hide some keys or keep keys on the car, because you never know if the one with the keys has an accident and then everyone's in trouble.
uh-huh. Right, right.
In the chat, we have, yay, Judy, beautiful reading, Judy, love the story. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Are there any questions?
There are.
Oh, good.
Maida asks, if you know the TV show Heartland, was your childhood on the ranch anything like it?
Heartland, I don't know that TV show.
I'm not sure of that show either, but I'll definitely check it out. Some other questions that were emailed. When did you first begin to write?
Well, I feel like I wrote a lot of years where it was just inside my head and it never made it down my arm and out the pen to the paper. But as soon as I retired, that was my goal. And as soon as I retired, I took a class at Sacramento City College, which is a community college. Elk Grove is a suburb of Sacramento. And I had writing teachers, or maybe they're all wonderful, but this one was wonderful. And she was very encouraging about my memoir work whenever I wrote about my experiences. She said, that's the important thing that you write. Nothing else is important.
Well, that sort of answers the second question we have, is when did you know you wanted to write your memoir?
Well, I knew I wanted to, she encouraged me to write memoir. It was the class I took was writing for magazines. So, I had a lot of classroom assignments, like explain how to make a mojito, or a character study, a interview and vignette of a person. I had assignments like writing for a magazine. So I did. I wrote a lot of things and I actually enjoyed it all.
That's great.
But I knew she was right. This was what's important, is kind of your memories to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah. We have more great comments. Just Liz, a beautiful reading. Donna Pides, who is another author, she says, wonderful story. Thanks for sharing it with us. Lori Bauer asks, tell us a little about the title of this book, Strawberry Roan.
Okay, Strawberry Roan refers to an early story in it. My first horse was a Strawberry Roan mare. She was just barely above the size of a pony. And in fact, I sort of called her my cow pony. But she was my lesson in learning to ride. She would run away with me often and fast. And that story is about my taking my father's advice and us trying everything, because he had told me that if I couldn't ride her, I couldn't keep her. So I was really stressed about that. But we tried all different kinds of bits and bridles and finally found a bridle that actually didn't have a bit in it. It was like a noseband that you pulled on that, and that let me gain control of her. And so I got to keep her. So Robin, Robin was a little bit later, Robin Dunlap, in my life. So I don't know if she ever knew my horse Babe. She died when I was in college, so probably not. But I had her, obviously, her whole life. And a roan, does everybody know what color? Strawberry roan is a color of a horse in which the base color, like a reddish brown, is mixed with white hairs. It's a very pretty color. And for Babe, it made her look like she was pink, a purplish pink. So if you have the book, you can read that story. The name of that story is Oh, That Strawberry Roan. Because there was also, anybody ever heard the cowboy song, Strawberry Roan? The cowboy song is about an outlaw horse, a bronc. And of course, my horse was being an outlaw for a while until we got her under control.
Thank you. Yeah, when I was looking up Strawberry Roan, because I didn't know before what that meant, I found that song on YouTube.
Oh, the song is wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Kelly says, thanks, Judy. Beautiful reading and great to get a glimpse of your story and writing prose.
Yeah.
And then we have.
Well, it looks like, do we really have over a half an hour left?
Yeah, but we do have several more questions for you.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. Oh, Dorothy said that's one of her favorite chapters.
Oh, good. Dorothy is another very good friend of mine.
Oh, good. Hi, Dorothy. Thanks for
another
being here.
bestie from a slightly different time in our lives.
Someone asks, have you read other memoirs of New Mexico that may have influenced yours?
Yes, I would say, well, I've read a lot of memoirs. I've read Wild and The Glass Castle and lots of classic memoirs. And, to give unsolicited advice, I think if you want to write a memoir, it pays to read memoirs. But there was a book written in about the 50s called No Life for a Lady by Agnes Morley Cleveland. And she wrote about growing up on a ranch near Moriarty, which I think is like in the Manzanos. Have I got that right? Any New Mexicans? Anyway, it was a wonderful, very sweet book, memoir. One of the stories I remember from it is that they wanted to go somewhere in a wagon, the buckboard wagon, I don't know, to pick piñons or something, some New Mexico reason. And they picked, it was a cattle ranch. They had what was called a remuda. They had a big herd of horses. So you would just go in and pick out a horse, and that was it. Well, they picked two horses that hadn't been trained to drive. They'd been trained to ride, but not to pull the wagon. So they had to kind of train them to drive on the way. That's the sort of thing I would have done.
Lori asked a couple questions. First one is, what has become of your original home in Gallinas Canyon?
Gallinas Canyon?
Gallinas.
Well, it's still there. And in fact, it's the picture. Can you put up the picture with the children running towards a house that you had in the series? That's my family on Hermit's Peak looking over the view. There you go, this picture. There's the house, and Hermit's Peak is sort of through these pine trees. And this is our herd of Morgan horses that we had later. And these are my sister's children, and they're running to the house because there's a thunderstorm there. So this picture shows the thunderstorm and shows everybody trying to get shelter before it starts to rain and have lightning. So that's the house. And this road, which used to just be the lane into the house, is now a public road. So if you go up into the Guyanas Canyon, now if I could remember the road, it's called something like, it has Vista in it. Anyway, it's a road, so you can drive along here and get a very good view of the house. The house is a very special house because my mother was, she was an admirer of Frank Lloyd Wright, and mother had very precise taste. You know, she knew what she wanted. And, you know, in her mind, she wanted a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. Well, Frank Lloyd Wright wasn't here, but John Gaw Meem was here. Does anybody in the audience know who John Gaw Meem is? Well, I'll tell you. He was the most famous New Mexico architect at the time, and probably historically the most famous New Mexico architect. He is the person who is responsible for the building standards for Santa Fe to keep Santa Fe, you know, looking old and Western. So he did that, and he also designed a lot of the buildings on the University of New Mexico, which of course gave it the characteristic Pueblo look. So anyway, he designed this house, and he designed it according to, you know, the principles that Frank Lloyd Wright used in building. The stone in it is the natural stone that lives on this outcrop. So the house was designed to sort of blend into the surroundings. It's a very beautiful house. So it's just made of stone and wood, and it had crushed flagstone on top of the roof. Another owner of this house described it as a work of art, and she saved a lot of the architecture history of it. So where was I going with this? Anyway, it was a special house and we enjoyed it. And so she got her Frank Lloyd Wright house. It just wasn't designed quite by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was designed by one of his contemporaries, and actually by, you know, somebody who knew him and admired him. He knew what mother wanted.
That's so
Okay.
awesome. Thank you, Judy. So Lori's second part 2 question is, have you been back to New Mexico recently, and how do you think the area you grew up in has changed?
I have been back. I've been back twice before I published the book. It took me about 8 years to write the book, and some parts of that area, like the area where the bride ghost was where I wrote about the bride ghost, that area is just completely unchanged. I mean, it was like, looks the same as it did, you know, the old deal where 40 years ago was yesterday. So the little good chance to talk about the Adobe Villages. This is the village of Guyanas. This church is Santo Nino. And you see this adobe house here, you see it leaning. The thing about adobe is homes is they have to be maintained. You have to replaster them, and you have to do things that protect the adobe from the weather, from rain. So this little adobe house is about to fall down. And so if you were a person who lived in that house, well, first of all, a lot of the people, of course, moved away because they could no longer do subsistence farming. They couldn't just plow up this little field and grow a little corn and live for a year like their parents and grandparents did. So a lot of the homes were just abandoned. And then, but it's a beautiful place. And the people who originally settled here thought it was a beautiful place too. So a lot of them that have moved back live in mobile homes now, which really is why they aren't as, picturesque. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So you've lost this beautiful look of the villages in the canyon, and there's several of them. Did that answer her question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
So we have a couple more questions right now. One is, how did it feel to write about your life? And what was the process like going through all of your memories?
Well, what I did is I wrote it each of the chapters in Strawberry Roan is pretty much a complete story, a short story. So they're really linked short stories. In memoir, sometimes they're called vignettes. They're short. They tend to not ramble on. They're very succinct stories, and that's what memoir vignettes are for other people too. So I just kept writing them, and then as I got nearer to the end, I'd sort of put them together and say, oh, there's a hole here. I haven't covered those years. Now, my editor advised me to keep it shorter, to just cover one part of my life. But, that just isn't what I wanted to do. I mean, I just stood up for my artistic goals and didn't. So, I mean, it's not many memoirs cover 37 years, but mine does. It covers all of the time that I lived in New Mexico. It covered the years I was in boarding school, because these were pivotal experiences in my life, the boarding school time and Carleton College and medical school. So I think it's all interesting and it's all very different. So I hope you find it that way when you read it. You as the audience. Oh, I know what the other part of that question was, is did I go back to New Mexico? And yes, I did. I went back twice when I was writing, because I wanted to see these things. I wanted to go back to the place that I had this experience. I wanted to look at the rocks. I did a lot of research for it because I knew when I was growing up that the geology around there was very interesting, but there was no way I could decipher it or study it then. And I really wanted to do that. So I did. I came back. And fortunately, Highlands University just is such a resource for Las Vegas. And we don't even, I never hardly thought about it, but I happened to find, just when I was writing my book, that they had a geology symposium at Highlands, and it included they actually produced a book from it called The Geology of Las Vegas, New Mexico. And they had like little tours, little guide tours, where if you went this far in a canyon and you looked out, well, the rock was this. And so I loved having that. So you probably heard some of the geologic detail I talked about even in the story. And I have if you go to my website, there's a companion blog post about the geology of Hermit's Peak and about the trail in case anybody wants to climb it, and also a little history of the Hermit. What I wondered about the Hermit is why he was never made a saint. Because, as I said in my blog, he was certainly a saint to the people who lived in the Guyanas Canyon at the time, which was, the latter part of the 19th century. I talked to people, the story I remember is a woman who was working for my mother, who was already an older person. She said that her mother had known the Hermit or met the Hermit, and that story was told to me, that 3-line story, with such reverence, and I knew the rest of the people in the canyon felt that way too.
Thank you, Judy. Robin asks, can you talk about your thrilling rides on the school bus through Guyunas Canyon to elementary school?
Well, I can say that I did ride on the school bus for much of the time that I went to school in Las Vegas, but I didn't really like it. I'll tell you that. It took too long, and I felt motion sick. But any ride up and down the Guyunas Canyon, the Canyon Road is a story into itself, and that is because this, we have this wonderful little valley here. But then we have a little mini Grand Canyon between the valley here and the road on the plains that goes from Las Vegas to Montezuma. And back in the day when that was, I believe I described it as sometimes one lane, sometimes 1.5, but never 2, was winding in and out of the little side valleys going up to the top of what was called High Point, the highest point of that road. And so driving anything up or down that canyon was an adventure. Driving either in a school bus or in a car.
It sounds like, thank you, Judy. Mary says, I'm tuning in late. Have you talked yet about how you happened to come to college in, I think, the Carleton College?
Yes. Yes, I can talk about that. Carleton College is one of the treasures that the Midwest seems to have. It has small liberal arts colleges. There are others besides Carleton. Carleton had about 2,000 students. And remember, I told you that my cousin Tom was my first love, and he went to Carleton College. And the minute he went to Carleton College, that's where I wanted to go.
Thank you. We just have one other question right now, but anyone, if you have any questions or comments, definitely put it in the chat box or Q&A. This question, what do you hope readers take away from reading your memoir?
Well, a couple of things. Anybody who writes a memoir, I think they really need to think about that. Why are you reading this? And I think that what I wanted people to take away from it is that you really can follow your bliss. And I learned that from my father because, he did not, he sort of defied, no, he didn't. He did what his father wanted him to do, but he didn't feel good about it. And so he always told me, for example, that I didn't have to be a doctor if I didn't want to be. Well, I wanted to be. So there was that. You can do that. You can make a horse ranch, like my father did. And you can get your daughter to kind of do the training if you do it right. But also my stories that are in here, it involve stories that have bits of hardship. As I said in talking about the Hermit's Peak part, it was kind of a lonely existence for a teenager. And one of the things that happens when you have a lot of animals on a ranch, I don't know if there's anybody in the audience who has had a lot of animals, but it can be a kind of a daunting thing. Horses get sick and they die. And in the 1950s, there wasn't nearly the veterinary skills, just like there are more people medical things you can do to help. In those days, if a horse got colic, it died. And if a horse, so I had a lot of losses, let's put it that way. I had losses of dogs and losses of horses. And I felt quite a significant amount of pressure to train the horses. There's a story in here called That Colt's Gotta Be Sold. And that's sort of the moral of that story, is that these horses are not just for you to play with. You have to get them in shape so that they can be ridden by somebody else so that they'll get a good home. If they're wild and nobody can take care of them, well, they're not going to get a good home. So that's it, you know, and plus I tell about, you know, I had a spell in my life where I drank to excess, and I have a chapter about how I dealt with that. You know, what were some of the consequences of that, some of which you might find sort of humorous, like seeing patients in the emergency room and not having a lot of memory of it in the next day. That's sort of scary, but I trusted myself that I had done what my training would have told me to do. And when I saw the patient the next day, it turned out that that was true. So there's just a little bit of everything, but every, I would have to say that every story, it doesn't have a moral, but it has a point, usually has a point.
Yeah. Mary asks, do any of your grandchildren love horses and do they ride?
Well, my daughter is a horse veterinarian, so she was always a lover of horses, and she and I did things with the horses for many years. As I say, she's now busy with her own children. So yes, two of my children rode a fair amount, but my grandchildren do not ride, and that's partly because of you know, it's like the people who lived in the villages in the Guyanas, you know, you move on because your life takes another turn, and it, you know, maybe you can't make a living doing what allowed you to enjoy the horses anymore, things like that. So no, none of my grandchildren are involved with horses. I have 6 very wonderful grandchildren who have many interests, but horses aren't one of them.
Looks like that's all for our questions, but I want to remind those of you who are still with us that in the chat box there, I put all the links where you can find more information about Judy and where to find copies of her book. Her website is judybeilvaughan.com. She has a blog there you might want to subscribe to. You may find copies of Strawberry Roan locally at Opposite in Santa Fe, located at the DeVargas Mall. Paper Trail Book Store in, it's Paper Trail, the bookstore in Las Vegas, New Mexico, has copies of Strawberry Roan. Capital Books on K in Sacramento, California. Carnegie Library was gifted copies that should be available to check out, and Santa Fe Public Library has copies on our shelf to check out. You'll see a link there if you want to find it in our catalog and put a hold on it. And of course, there's copies available to purchase online and ebooks available to purchase online. Anything you want to say before we head out?
Yeah, I want to make a note about the pictures in the printed book are pretty good. They're newer techniques of putting pictures in books, but the pictures that are in the ebook are even better because they're done electronically. So if you want the pictures really nice, the ebook is a good choice, and it's pretty inexpensive. It's another nice thing about ebooks.
Thank you so much, Judy.
Somebody asked the question I just saw, is there an audio book? And there is not an audio book. There's not an audio book.
Someone wrote, they said you don't need to share this message, but I might as well now, since that question came up. Lori said, you don't need to read this, but wanted to let you know that if you have considered making this into an audiobook, would love to work with you. I've done several memoirs of New Mexico women, and I'm a horsewoman myself.
Wow.
So you might want to
have her contact me through the website. There's a,
Sure.
a contact form you can
Yeah.
fill out. Or,
And then
I wish I'm here ready to pass out my cards, but I can't. They don't go through the electronics very well, business cards.
no, not really. We have a lot more thank yous.
Good. Will I
Yeah.
how do I get the names of the people? Are you going to send me a list of the?
Yeah, we can do that, and I'll definitely make sure that you and Lori link up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mary says, so good to see and hear you. You look great, and I loved the book. So many memories.
Good. 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 All right. Well, thank
so
you all
much,
for
Judy.
coming. It was really fun to do it. And I can't wait till I can come. I really can't wait. I'm getting my next COVID shot Monday, and I really want to come back to New Mexico and do some in-person book signings and things in Santa Fe and Albuquerque and Las Vegas. So.
Well, we'd love to have you here at the library when.
Well, I would love to do it at the library. Yeah. I love libraries. I'm a big supporter of the Sacramento Public Library.
Oh, good. I bet they have a good system there.
They do. They do.
Well, everyone stay safe, stay warm, and read books, read Strawberry Roan, and have a good night. Thank you, Judy, a million times. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me come.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.